Welcome back. What we're going to talk about now is sort of the theory of putting. Jeff, after we work with people on their technique with putting, I really want them to understand that their job really is not to make putts, okay? Their job is to basically control the roll, the speed, and the line of the putting. What is the difference between, what do I mean when I say their job is not to make putts?
I think, one of the things that I find in doing the mental training and helping players with the mental part is that a lot of times players get so bound up in trying hard to make putts that they forget some of the fundamentals. Now, one thing they may forget are some of the fundamentals related to setup and some of the things that you learned last month. But sometimes what they forget is, again, what we really want them to fixate on ultimately is standing over the putt. We would really like for a player to be just thinking about speed. In order to do that, we want them to make sure that they've established a good line through a good read, and we also want to make sure that what they've done is they're not thinking a lot about their stroke. We want to keep stroke thoughts in the practice area, and when you get out to the golf course, you're going to trust that your stroke is fine and you're going to roll it fine, that you've got a good line, and then it becomes really an exercise of speed. And what great putters do is that their attention is really on the speed. It's not necessarily on what their stroke looks like or making the putt or is the line correct. It's more about roll it at speed.
Absolutely. So if we talk about this, we've got speed, line, and break. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right. So speed, in my opinion, is related a lot to practice. Okay. The line, which is the line on the ball, that is related to technique. And we'll talk about that where, we want you to line the ball up every time where you're trying to go. And when you hit the putt, if your technique is good, this ball will roll perfectly end over end. So speed is related to practice, line is related to technique, and then break, obviously, is related to experience. And what I mean by experience is, how much does this putt break? Well, I think you have to have been there, done that, to kind of have an idea. And you see it every week on the tours, where the commentators will say, well, everyone's misread this putt today. So that's really a guess, or it's a guesstimate. So you're doing your best job there. So again, speed, roll, and break. If I have a player that calls me up, they say, hey, CJ, my putting wasn't very good today. First thing I asked him, is it speed, line, or break? Is that right? So from there, it makes it real easy. And if you can kind of elaborate a little bit on sort of the process versus outcome of why that's important. I mean, I don't know if you want to take it from there.
Yeah, sure. Again, the outcome part where people get really fixated on making the putt gets people away from just being here with feeling a good putt. And ultimately, the players that I've worked with, and Nationwide Tour guys, I'm thinking particularly of one guy who made 10 birdies at a Nationwide event a couple years ago, and he felt like he was making everything, and he was making a lot of putts. And one of the things that he talked about is he got really away from being fixated on having to have the ball go in the hole and really got locked in on just feel the speed, and that's all he was doing was feeling the speed. And he got to that point, basically he kind of gave himself permission to get away from worrying about his stroke and to get away from being overly fixated on is my line perfect, and he did the best that he could in making a good read and so establishing a line, and he had felt like he had put the work in to have his stroke be consistent, and now it was a function of just feel the speed. And ultimately what that did is it took a lot of the distractions away from him when he was standing over the putt, and he felt like he had fewer things in his head going on, and that really helped him putt very well that day.
Okay. So if I understand this too, and this is something I want the viewers at home to understand, speed is practice. Very important. Okay. So if you call me up and your speed is off, go practice on the putting green. And we're going to give you drills here in a little bit on how to practice that effectively. The roll of the ball, or the line that when we refer to it, as that ball rolls end over end, that's technique, and then break is experience. Again, to reiterate, after I hit this putt, what happens if, I've got this line set up here, and I hit this putt, I've committed to a speed before I hit the putt, and that's either front, middle, or back, and we'll go over that in a second, okay? And I hit this putt, and obviously that ball right there was rolling end over end, so, and obviously I made the putt, but let's say I missed it. Then what happens? What do I have the option to become one of two players. What is that?
Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately, and we're talking about putting here, but this has application to every part of a golfer's game. After you strike a ball, how you process the information about what happened there, whether it be out, again, on the range or on the golf course or on the putting green, it really is a function of, do you interpret it like a scientist would interpret it, or do you interpret it like a judge would interpret it? And the best players in the world have learned how to be scientists and basically students of the game. They just observe what happened, and then they take information from that, and that helps them make an adjustment for the next time. What judging thinking is about is, was that good? Was that bad? Was that terrible? Was that awesome? And people get into if you get into a judgment after every time you hit a ball, you're going to be on an emotional roller coaster on the golf course, and particularly on the putting green. If instead what you're doing as a scientist would is noting, wow, that ball broke more than I thought it would, or the ball didn't really roll line over line, it's a little more of a dispassionate way to observe, make an adjustment, and then get on to the next one. It's like a scientist does. They don't judge the end of their experiment. They just observe the variables, manipulate the variable for the next time, and then get on to the next experiment. So every putt becomes an opportunity for something good to happen, and by good I mean more information. And the more information we gather, the more adjustments we can make, the more consistent we can be, and make more putts.
Absolutely. And what I see with players, especially kids, after they've missed putts the first couple holes, they're walking with their heads slumped over. They're saying negative comments about, the way they're putting that day. And obviously as the round progresses, they become worse.
Right.
If you look at this, and I had that putt, and that putt obviously went in end over end, I would look at it, even if I missed, I nailed my speed was correct, the line was correct, in other words, the ball rolling end over end. I can't control the break. I could hit a spike mark, I could hit a footprint, a divot, and the ball does not go in, but I nailed 2 out of the 3 areas, and I nailed the only 2 that I can control. You can only control the speed, and you can only control the line. The break is out of your hands. So when you evaluate yourself when you putt, you're only worried about the speed and ultimately the line, but that's a technique issue. That should be done beforehand. That's when you come get our lessons and work with a pro. But after that, it's out of your hands. So you really have the opportunity. I can go out and miss every putt and walk off every green positive because I'm nailing my speed and I'm nailing my line. Is that correct?
Yeah, and part of that too is learning what you can control and what you don't control, like you just said. And what a lot of people do is they allow frustration to build when they're on the golf course, and particularly on the putting green if they're not making putts, because they have a tendency to get really frustrated about, did I make the putt or did I not, versus did I do the things that I could control or not. Right. And again, what the great players do, obviously nobody's going to be happy about missing a putt. We're not going to put a smiley face on a 3-putt, okay? But what we can do is we can affirm to ourselves and validate to ourselves, hey, I did what I could do. And at the end of the day, yes, sometimes greens are bumpy. Sometimes you hit a spike mark, and sometimes you just misread it. Those are things that are an endemic part of the game. And again, those are the things that for people to get very frustrated about that part of the game, it's completely irrational. And ultimately, that's what gets people in a real frustrated mode on the golf course and gets them away from the essential elements of the things that they can control.